Biological classification, a story-based exploration of biology. Once upon a time, in a magical forest, there lived many different creatures, each with their own unique characteristics. These creatures were classified into different groups based on their characteristics, such as their shape, size, and color. One day, a group of curious animals set out on a journey to explore the forest and learn about the different ways of classifying the creatures that lived there. They met an old wise owl who was well versed in the subject of biological classification. The owl explained that all living organisms could be classified into different groups based on their characteristics. He told them that these groups were arranged in a hierarchical manner, with the most general group at the top and the most specific group at the bottom. He also mentioned that this system of classification was known as taxonomy. The animals were amazed to learn that there were so many different types of creatures in the forest and each one had its own unique characteristics. The owl then took the animals on a tour of the forest, pointing out different animals and explaining how they were classified. They saw a lion and the owl explained that it belonged to the animal kingdom in the class of mammals. They also saw a snake and the owl explained that it belonged to the animal kingdom, the class of reptiles, and the order of Squamata. The owl also showed them how different organisms were classified into different groups such as Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia and their characteristics that make them different from one another. The owl taught them about the 5 main kingdoms of life, which were Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. He had explained that each kingdom had its own unique characteristics, and that organisms within each kingdom were further classified into different groups based on their similarities and differences. The animals learned that the Monera kingdom was composed of unicellular organisms that had a prokaryotic cell structure, and that the Protista kingdom was composed of unicellular or multicellular organisms that had a eukaryotic cell structure. They also learned that the fungi kingdom was composed of organisms that had a eukaryotic cell structure and reproduced via spores, and that the plantae kingdom was composed of organisms that had a eukaryotic cell structure and could produce their own food through photosynthesis. Finally, they learned that the Animalia kingdom was composed of organisms that had a eukaryotic cell structure and were heterotrophic. As the journey came to an end, the animals realized that the forest was a diverse place, filled with many different types of creatures. They learned about the different ways of classifying organisms into different groups based on their characteristics, and the importance of understanding the diversity of life in the forest. The owl, who was an expert in the subject of biological classification, had taught them about the 5 main kingdoms of life, which were Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. He had explained that each kingdom had its own unique characteristics, and that organisms within each kingdom were further classified into different groups based on their similarities and differences. But the owl also told them that there were some organisms which were not included in any of the 5 main kingdoms. These were the viruses, viroids, brown algae, and lichens. He explained that viruses were not living organisms as they do not have the ability to carry out life processes on their own and need a host cell to reproduce. Viroids were also non-living infectious agents, similar to viruses but smaller in size. Brown algae were a group of multicellular, photosynthetic organisms that belonged to the kingdom Chromista, while lichens were a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an alga or a cyanobacterium. As they bid farewell to the owl and returned home, the animals were filled with a sense of wonder and appreciation for the diversity of life in the forest, and the importance of understanding the different characteristics and classification of the organisms, even those which were not included in the main 5 kingdoms of life. The end. This is a summary of the chapter Biological Classification from Class 11th Insert Biology book. It covers the importance of taxonomy and classification and understanding the diversity of living organisms and the different characteristics of different groups of living organisms like Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. And the topic of classification of the organisms which were not included in the 5 main kingdoms of life such as viruses, viroids, brown algae, and lichens. We hope you enjoyed our video on biological classification. We hope the story-based format helped you to understand the chapter better. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out to us. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more exciting content.